Thanks again, everyone, for your patience. Good evening, I'm Christy Madden from the State Library of Queensland, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Turrbal people and the Yagara people, and pay respects to their ancestors who came before them. We're pleased to present tonight's talk, Digital Display and Interfaces, as part of the Floodlines, a Living Memory exhibition program. For those of you who haven't had the chance yet to visit the SLQ gallery before coming here tonight, this exhibition reflects on the personal stories of Queenslanders who experienced the 2010-11 floods and cyclones and celebrates the resilience of communities. This content is expressed through various digital forms, including the augmented reality Brisbane River, which weaves itself throughout the space. Using an iPad and the Floodlines app, you can simulate the rise and fall of the Brisbane River across the CBD and surrounding areas. Since the exhibition launched in April, this element has attracted a lot of immediate attention as a Queensland first in AR technology. Tonight we are privileged to host a panel of speakers, including researcher and designer Deb Paulson and Lubi Thomas, Senior Curator of Digital Media at QUT. Unfortunately, Ben Johnston was unable to attend, but we are excited to have with us the Creative Director of the AR River Project, Jess Huddard. Following our conversation, there will be an opportunity for audience questions, and as we are recording the talk, we will need you to wait for the roving microphone to reach you before you ask your questions. Please be aware that we will be also video recording and live streaming this evening's discussion and question time, and if you do have any concerns about this, please see me or another staff member. And if you would like to comment or follow the discussion online, please use the Twitter hashtag SLQDTC. And I'll now hand over to Lubi. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming on this beautiful, wet evening. First up, in the spirit of digital communities, there's a little bit of audience participation. We all need your help to keep us on track when it comes to time, because the three of us could probably chat here for the next few hours. So at a certain stage, there's a slide that will come up with a second sort of stage proposition, and in the bottom it says, if we're not talking about this stuff, make a signal. So the signal is, hurry up. So when we get to that slide and we're still rambling on about some other bits, could you please all give us a signal and we'll then get on with the action. So the idea is that we're going to chat about a couple of propositions and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions, because that's always far more interesting for you guys to tease ideas out of us. First up, I thought we would just do a bit of an introduction. So as Kirsty's already said, my name's Lubi Thomas and I'm the Senior Curator at QUT in the digital media area. And I've also given Deb and Jess 60 seconds to give you a potted version of who they are, just so you know who we all are. So over to Deb.
Hi. I started off a long time ago as a visual artist, degree in fine arts, and then I became an interface designer. I'd done a degree in interior design as well, and I became an interface designer on games in the early 90s. And so I've kind of loved delving in games. And I must make a confession that I'm an avid Dungeons & Dragons player, then and now. And now I work mostly in what we would call alternate reality games. So I make games in real spaces, a bit like Dungeons & Dragons, but for families and people to play in museums and galleries and places like that. So mobile phones, public screens, and we use a bit of AR toolkit technology as well. So ARGs are my big thing, and also simulation design. So my other area of design and research is using big data to tell stories about important sustainable concepts. So I've done some neighbourhood design simulations, some farming simulations, some energy simulations, etc., for various different clients and researchers. So those are the two areas that quite often combine in lots of interesting ways, live data and AR technology. So I'm really, I could rave for hours too.
So I'm Jessica Huddard. I'm Creative Director of a local design-led digital company here in Brisbane called Josephmark. We have been working in the digital space for the last 8 years, for as long as we've existed. We do everything from websites to apps to installation work to augmented reality has kind of we've been dabbling in for the last year or so. I guess our kind of philosophy around the work that we do is that design and development go hand in hand. It's not a stage where you come up with a concept and then you design it and then you get a developer involved to make it and then you maybe refine it. we actually work together in a really holistic process the whole way and do a lot of prototyping and iterative work to get something from just an idea that might address a problem to the final solution.
Excellent, and we did that in time. Well done, folks. Okay, so first up, I thought we might do a little bit of myth busting. So there are a couple of statements that we'll go through, all of which I'm sure you've all experienced, all of which you can read and they can't. So the first up is, it's quick and easy to produce. You know, surely you just hop onto some kind of nice smart software package, you drop in some free online source code from the library, and there you go, you've got a project. So, could you please respond to that statement besides hitting the person that said it?
Yeah, it's not quite like that. The Floodlines project that we did, the Augmented Reflections project, really involved three companies to begin with. So Josephmark facilitated the project and we did a lot of the design work for it. We then had our sister company, Breeder, who do a lot of 3D work and motion graphics to actually create the 3D renders of each of the 14 areas within the exhibition. And then we worked with a company called Defiant to actually, for them to actually use a gaming platform to make it into the augmented reality piece that it became. So it was a really quite intensive process that probably went over about 6 months from start to finish.
And even with the games engine, it wasn't just here's a games engine we can just use, we'll just drop it in there. That
it
was
then
quite
had
a
to be
process.
modified, and actually they needed to create new tech to work in with their existing tech to actually make this happen.
And I guess there was a lot of research. I mean, you know, you're actually trying to give back to people, you know, a true experience or a true data reflection of what occurred. So where did you go seeking that sort of data?
And I guess even stepping back a little bit, it wasn't like we just decided we wanted to do an augmented reality project for this. It was about how do we get the visitors to the exhibition to really understand what was happening around these suburbs of Brisbane and Greater Brisbane, and how do we enable them to put themselves in the place without kind of being there at that time. And augmented reality ended up being a tool that we could use to really let them kind of play like the hand of God, and for them to have control over what they looked at and what happened when. And to get that to be its truest representation, we needed to go to government departments to get the actual topical maps of those areas. And then we built from scratch the 3D models of those areas and worked with Lubi and the rest of the team here at SLQ to actually decide which areas were going to be most applicable and even how much we concentrated on them and what the final renders ended up being.
And that was a really intensive 8 months, it seemed like
a year. Yeah, it would have been like 6 to 8 months, the whole project. And maybe longer if we count from the initial conceptual idea. Yeah.
So with your work, I mean, you just, you know, drop things into software packages and, you know, chuck things out the other end, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah, especially like in the project Scoot I did, which was across 6 different museums and galleries in Melbourne. I had not only multiple organisations, the Victorian Art Gallery, ACME, Melbourne Museum, and a bunch of others. So they all had their own policies and technicians to deal with and things like that. But like you were saying, every client that I've worked with, they haven't come to me with a project. They've come to me with a question of how can we encourage participation in blah, blah, blah. So that's usually the question. How can whatever you do with games and simulations, how does that increase participation in our areas of something or other? So you kind of start with that, and then you do a lot of consulting, like with various different stakeholders, and then you ignore most of that because stakeholders kind of... if you're not constantly researching the area and what's possible and things like that, a lot of the clients can have kind of a naive idea, or my secretary said you could do this with that, or my son uses Facebook all the time, can't we use that? So there's a lot of that you have to deal with. So a lot of the time we spend a lot of time in the conception area, which is looking at what all the stakeholders are, what all the resources are, but then taking a step back and standing in behalf of the user. So you're there as I call it a domain translator. So as an interaction design, I'm translating multiple domains. And then I do that on behalf of the user. So then what does the user want? And that's kind of where you go from there. And then that's how you decide what technology you use and everything else. But once you've decided on the technology, because if you really believe in what the project wants or what the user wants, then you sometimes have to use technologies you're not familiar with. So then you have to resource people or learn new processes.
Exactly.
But for me, there's no other reason to do a project unless I'm having to do that. So,
Yeah.
So
That's
sort of
the
what
fun.
kind of platforms have you used in the past, and what kind of combinations have you used?
well, Scoot, for example, because it's in multiple areas, is kind of an excuse to experiment with a whole bunch of different interactions. So it's a carnival game where these creatures from a virtual world have come and invaded these areas, and there's carnival games spread out, and you have to seek those carnival games out through a mobile phone and beat the carnival creatures at their own games. And so those games are experimental. We use some AR technology in the State Library of Victoria where you search through books through this device to find ghosts, and then you capture these 3D ghosts and put them away, and they would tell you a little story about the library. Other ones we would have in the Melbourne Museum where there was Farlap. We had his cousin called Farcical, who was a carnival character, and he was really lazy, so you had to shout and cheer as a group into a microphone in order to get this race or this game to occur on site. So we did a lot of experiment, like it was just an excuse to do a whole lot of experimental stuff throughout that, which meant that you had a lot of different people working on a lot of different things. So we used AR Toolkit, Flash, C++. We did a lot of it worked off a basic database, so MySQL, PHP, a lot of web. I do a lot of things with web technology because then I'm not so limited as to how I can display it.
But I remember with the first Scoots, I mean, it really was down to SMS. I mean, you know, you've got to kind of work with who your audience are and what you've got them outside, you've got them moving, what have they got at hand?
Yeah.
You know, where that's changed. I have to explain this. This is just this is not a random slide. This was one for you, Jess, about, you know, the whole kind of mapping thing that Ben wanted to talk about, which is, you know, how is there's a race going on at the moment. I don't know if you want to expand on this conversation.
In terms of 3D technology and augmented reality.
There's a race to map the world in 3D, and where we're doing it with, you know, you're sending some poor researcher off to, you know, Brisbane City Council's resources to find the maps. You know, these guys are using military-grade drones.
Yeah, you can't
really
compete
going
with
for it. Yeah, but I mean, I guess also that's a reflection of how important and how kind of things like the AR River of Brisbane, how important that's becoming, and how much people are picking up on that as a way of understanding their world.
Yeah, it is, because it's almost realistic. It's hyper-realistic, really.
So, but the good thing about Google and them is they do produce APIs and little SDKs, so you can use a lot of their data. So in a lot of the simulation projects, I use a lot of live data and things from Google APIs and from various different sources like that. So it's kind of good to have that to rely on. They do a lot of the work for you.
For both of you, you know, it's always Josephmark as a company, Deb as a researcher and designer. It's always, you must be constantly looking at what's coming through the pipeline, what kind of tools there are out there. But is there a disconnect often between the tools and the users? You know, that kind of conversation as well. Like, or you finding that people are having more? You know, they're more technically. You know, I'm walking around with an iPad and a phone, and a smart device.
Yeah.
Are you finding that starting to happen more?
I think. I think it is starting to happen more. I think that younger generations are obviously digital natives from the time that they're born. They are digital natives. And I think that the intelligence in the user experience design that companies like Apple have with products like the iPad are naturally intuitive. And so I think that disconnect is becoming a lot less of an issue. And I think it also comes back to the overall user experience that we create and making sure that that's intuitive and that the interactions are logical. Yeah. So it kind of goes both ways.
As a developer, though, there's definitely a disconnect because we often have to choose a platform to develop for on a mobile device. Like, you know, Apple comes with a lot of limitations as to what you can use. Again, so it's best to use web mobile technology so you can work across devices, but then there's something like 870 different dimensions, even just on smartphones, for you to design for.
And different browsers have different
browsers
about what they're going to do.
But that's where I think that as a designer, our responsibility is to make what we're creating responsive to
and accessible.
the tools and accessible to the devices that people are using at the other end.
So once you've gone through the pains of actually making the thing, so that wasn't as easy as just dropping it into a nice software package, I guess if that's hard, then I guess the easy bit must be installing the work. So, surely it's easy to install once you've got the project. Don't you just kind of come in, chuck it on a computer and, turn on the projector?
Yeah, not quite.
Even I would thumb someone at that point, I have to say, being on the other end of that as well.
I mean, for example, with the Augmented Reflections project, we created an app for that project that users would come and use. So, I mean, one part of that, one barrier to that is that we were using iPads, so we are using Apple's iOS platform, and we needed to wait, I think it was a month or 6 weeks, for our app to actually get approved by the App Store before we could even publish it, so that users could have access to it.
And I guess there's no negotiating going, we need that really, really quickly.
Yeah, and I think we got it down, we got it through faster than what was normal because I guess they kind of listen to people in urgency. But there's definitely those considerations to be had as well when you are using third-party tools to integrate something.
I have the problem of a lot of the times people say, oh, no, we don't do it that way, or that doesn't get done that way. When you're installing in real-world spaces, there's a lot of contingencies that you have to be careful of. But for me, whenever someone says, oh, that's not possible, that's when my spark goes where, oh, this is where all the possibilities and opportunities are. Then as soon as someone says you can't do it, that's like, well, us working out how to do it actually means we'll be ahead of the game. So I'm always looking for the, no, that can't be done. Always waiting to hear that, and then I go, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there were even humps between the three parties that we had to get together, and then between people within each of those parties to work together. Yeah. It's a lot of creative problem solving of just almost being stubborn in the sense that you don't want to be proven wrong for the final outcome.
Yeah, and even sort of as a digital media curator, I mean, even when you're working in video, which you would think was a no-brainer and you really could just get it sent over, it's like, is it on the right operating, is the computer compatible?
Yeah.
And it's not just the operating system,
Exactly.
it's, does it have the right graphics card in it, the right audio card?
Is it plugged in?
Oh, codecs, is it plugged in? Well, no, I can usually, and the codecs, especially getting works out of China, I keep on discovering whole new arrays of codecs that I didn't know existed. And we do have some great video players out there, VLC and things that seem to be able to deal with most codecs. However, the screens do not like changing between 4:3 and the 16:9 ratio. So then you get into a whole hoo-ha. So you have to build a show reel because your video, your media player, the screen can't cope with the media player throwing two different ratios up at it. And the day that we get an international agreement on audio levels will be the day that I am happy. Because that's the next thing that happens is everybody has a different audio level. But you don't want to use just a graphic sound equalizer because that just takes out all the top bass, all the top and all the bottom. So we're sitting there on a computer looking at looking at the graphics of the audio visually and just trying to match everything up.
Yeah.
Sort of, the easy bit was someone sending me the hard drive, and from then on, it's a nightmare.
What I found really, really surprising, though, when I worked with the State Library of Victoria and some really old-school organisations, the reason why they wanted me to do all this experimental work is because they actually wanted to put pressure on their systems and processes. They wanted to actually see how the CBN, for example, the Cultural Broadband Network, would behave under those conditions, how an installation might happen, how their tech support people will respond to unusual situations, and what processes. So they're sometimes doing these kind of crazy, outlandish things that some people with clipboards would say no to. There's a bunch of other people in these organisations who want to put pressure on these parts of their organisation, which is that's really heartening, actually.
And I swear, I mean, if we were as tricky as tech, I don't think we'd have jobs. I've had the whole system where I've had a whole show up and running 5 minutes before it all just decided to stop talking to each other. And individual computers just all went, don't like that projector anymore.
Kind of like the Murphy's Law of anything technological, I think.
We should probably...
I'm quite surprised.
There's a few bits of tech in this room that might
I'm quite surprised. Mick was a tech on a game I did here, as a zombie LARP, not so long ago. And it was incredible how much can be done. And I love that thing where you come across a tech person and you say, oh, look, we want to do this, and they get that look across their face like, I'm going to sort this out like no one else has ever thought before. And you just go, yeah. And then they come back with some resolution that's better than you'd actually requested. So those collaborations are really good fun.
And I guess that's the frontier of imagination and creativity is, you know, it is always pushing those boundaries. It's not being, it's kind of constantly problem solving on the hop, even when the show's up and running. I mean, there is no moment where that stops.
And being optimistic that there's an outcome. Yeah. Or a solution.
Yeah, and you will get there come hell or high water.
Yeah.
It's going to get to an outcome.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, if it's not easy to make, and it's definitely not easy to install or to keep running, certainly, you know, in a live event like Scoot, where, you know, you're having to talk to everything very nicely in an exhibition, you know, why is it that you're doing it? You know, why are you compelled to keep on making projects like, you know, the Augmented River, and why are you still continuing unstoppably to push the area of, you know, digital display and physical world and digital slippage that you persist and keep on making works in? What's driving you?
I think for me and for Josephmark, it's actually this drive to keep on bettering. So to keep on bettering an experience that somebody can have in a certain context, and also a natural curiosity and drive to keep trying something new. I think that's just inherent in any creative mind, is this, you just want to do the new next thing. But I think it's also important for community and for places like the State Library of Queensland to harness these sorts of technology and to keep driving more and more in the future, purely from the sense that you don't want to be left behind, and you do want to be able to be able to use this sort of technology when it's almost necessary.
I mean, do you think there's a difference from the point of view of the audience, you know, so they can, you know, come in and they're kind of, you know, come in, I mean, you know, we have traditional media artefacts, paintings, maps, sculptures, that...
People are wanting more. People are wanting more stimulation and more creative ways of experiencing something. And I mean, we couldn't have told the story of what happened with the floods in quite the same way that we could without creating this installation with augmented reality and allowing the user to have control and for them to have that emotional connection to a certain area. We couldn't have done it without that. So yeah, I think it's also coming from the user, they're demanding it.
So I guess is that kind of that slippage from viewer to user, so you are actively involved in your experience of viewing the work in inverted commas, because you become a part of the work. Yeah,
and controlling it.
I think you're really lucky that the market's at this place at the moment where you've got clients that let you experiment. I mean, the whole thing for me is I find that I'm in a really lucky situation where I'm a designer inside of a university, so people come to do innovative projects. And so therefore I don't have as much market demand. I can experiment as much as I want. But it's really interesting that the marketplace has actually become really open to that.
Yeah.
For me, the reason I stay in it is quite selfish. It's like every project is an excuse to make new friends. That's how I figure it.
We were just discussing how many social media.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's incredible to be part of a creative community, and every project means you're meeting new people. But not only that, you're meeting new people who push your skills and your concepts and your knowledge all the time. I mean, the augmented reality community is quite intense, and they come from theatre, literature, they come from technological backgrounds, they come from music, there's all sorts of amazing things going on that not one skill base can take care of. So A, I can experiment, B, I can make new friends, and C, you can demonstrate. What's interesting to me is a lot of these AR technologies and these projects I've been doing are about demonstrating to users how they can imagine using the tools themselves. I tend to never make a project that can't be made by a user. So part of the every project is like the Scoot game gets turned into Cypher Cities, which you'll see next, which became an online. It's using the Scoot back engine to create an interface for people to make their own Scoots. So a lot of the tools and stuff that I build in every project become assets for other projects as well. So that's probably why.
So then that's kind of really that's taking that idea of, you know, because I come from the cultural thing, curatorial, in a space called a gallery, roughly speaking. So it's kind of, for me, it sort of is really about changing from the passive experience to that active experience.
Totally.
But yours is almost kind of turning from the user into the participatory, like you're becoming a...
Sometimes it's even subversive. So, I mean, the big point about Scoot was to rattle the sort of inherited practices of museums. And, I mean, I didn't tell museums and gallery people that at the beginning,
It's on video now.
But, I mean, we had to sneak the subversion in a little bit, and for me, when a museum or a gallery curator says we want people to feel more at home, then they're going to have to expect that to be at home means to feel some kind of membership to a place, and the only way to feel membership to a place is to feel at home there. So basically, when the art galleries asked me to make kids more engaged, it meant that they had to be able to make a lot of noise, throw stuff, misbehave, and do some really subversive acts. So, that was a really interesting thing for me. It's not only being a participant, but being a rule breaker so that you can actually see how plastic these inherited practices are. So, by bringing AR technology into everyday environment, suddenly one of the nicest things a player ever said, and a lot of them do say this of Scoot and a couple of other games we've done, they said, now everything looks like a game. And in a way, what's happened is you've transformed the world into inventory, into a stage and a muse. And so basically, AR technology has an incredible capacity to do that. So it's an incredible capacity to take this sort of fantasy world away from a screen and into the world again. So for me, I don't really enjoy computer-based gaming, but I enjoy games that make the world a fantastic place. So.
And that's where I sort of think there's a really interesting slippage between AR and what you were doing with the River Project and where you've already been playing and developing that space of having physical objects and physical interactions that have actually a digital response to them, such as something that kind of goes back to your computer and it knows that you've won some points because you've done something. So, I mean, do you think, again, I mean, that's obviously your area of passion, but, are we going past a point where people, don't just want to read text on a screen and go, that's a digital experience? They're actually kind of wanting to... I mean, I think it's quite hard. People are well trained when they go into galleries.
They want Minority Report, they want Iron Man, they want Prometheus. Who doesn't?
And it's not that far away. It really isn't.
Just a few $1 billion away, I guess, and a big team.
But it's almost real.
But people want to have fun. I mean, they want things to do that help them interact with other people. So a lot of the things about AR technologies is it creates an exclusive membership to an alternate reality. So basically, if you're playing Pac-Manhattan in Manhattan and you can see all the virtual Pac-Man on the streets, and you can see other people who can see them, you're suddenly connected with those people because you're having an exclusive communal interaction in that space now. And, that is really, really powerful. So spaces that were are kind of dead spaces of interaction can become quite alive with AR technology in that way. So I think that's really important too.
And actually, we've just got Milk Up, which I think is a really great project. And this one's really one of those ones where you've kind of facilitated, it grew out of Scoot, and you've kind of really facilitated this space for classes. And
for classrooms and kids. So kids get to, these are pictures of kids at the Adelaide Botanic Gardens. So they, instead of following that normal questionnaire on paper where you ask questions about going to look for things there, they all go and do research on certain parts of the gallery. Of the Botanic Gardens, and then they come back using the Scoot engine again, but with a private interface. They make their own game challenges and guide games through the online system that's instantly available on their mobile phones, and then they play each other's games. So they're both the teachers and the learners. So it's not like them coming and be given a prescribed way to learn in that site. They come there again, and they see that site as a muse for learning, and they actually, that synthesis of turning information that they're seeing into something they have to pass on to someone else is really exciting to watch.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of a growing space as well. So
this is the other one.
This is my favourite. You have to explain yourself for this one.
I don't know how I scored this, but I'm doing it again this year. It's a 36-hour. They let me, there's grass up here between the Goma and the library, and they let me set up a survival camp there. And people audition to become survivors, and they sleep there. It's like a 40-hour survival game. We did a call-out for zombies. We thought about 20 would turn up. 120 turned up. We had... that's me with one of my zombie crew there. I was the commander-in-chief. So it was this zombie story, a typical zombie story that I so wasn't into before, but now I'm crazy about. But basically it was a game where we set up challenges and the whole site transformed. I mean, there was people watching. So basically we had to build a whole bunch of challenges and missions using a bunch of AR technology as well for these people to survive the 40 hours. And we just hammered them. Like, they got attacked by all sorts of things. They got Nerf training. They did all these sorts of things and then played out all of these. So we had some actors, some writers, just some nerds off the street, but it went for 40 hours. It was exhausting, but the most fun I've had in a long time. And we shot a lot of it, so we've been able to make webisodes out of the actual event as well. So, yeah.
And that's a really nice idea as well, is how, again, it's not just one artefact, it's not just one thing that starts and stops at this point, but there's all these spin-offs, there's these, spin-offs of product, spin-offs of community, spin-offs of, learning, both from the point of view of delivery of those kind of events as well as from the point of view of participating.
But it was just the community coming together too, like having the whole auditorium at the edge filled with people putting makeup on that have never done it before, turning themselves into zombies, doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and basically we were given all of the underground access too of this whole area, so we were having underground battles where we had red lights and fog machines, and it was really scary. And and we the edge was all the internet was turned off, and you could only hack into certain areas to get information from the lab. And so we created all these sort of augmented reality, in that they weren't real organisations and they weren't real. So we set up a whole virtual reality around them about the world gone wrong. Plus, we get the best camping spot ever.
Yeah, which is kind of worth it.
And what was the
cool
response from the participants?
Well, most people, again, didn't know how to behave. Like you go to a film, you walk in, you know what the interaction order is. You get a ticket, you walk in, you sit down, it starts. Now, when you ask someone, we didn't even know what to call it, So nobody's quite sure, even with Scoot and a lot of my other projects, no one's quite sure what to expect. So there's actually this overcoming of a barrier that you have to design really well for. And the good thing now is that we've got all this nice media that tells a story about the zombie survival game, is that now we tell the story better, and now we've got a lot more people interested than last year.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, you would remember in the 90s and maybe even going on in the early 2000s, there was this terror that, gaming was going to be the end of society and social behaviour, and our kids weren't going to be growing up knowing how to speak to each other. I mean, in fact, there are more and more of these
But what
events
happens
developing.
with these kids and these, because it's mostly young people came to involve, they brought all of their experience from gameplay and all of their experience from narratives, and they were able to engage instantly with the tropes and the processes that are already set up. And that's why we used the zombie, because we knew the maximum amount of people would understand. And they were so critical. It's like, well, this is a virus. Are they the undead or are they the virus? And there's all this technical stuff about zombies, right?
The nuances.
And they're for real. So we did a lot of research. We set up one of the things as a lab, so they had to actually do experiments using kind of pH activators and a whole lot of things. So the thing is that all of that bad stuff they did as kids became really important for them to be able to interact and make new friends in this situation. So I'm all for it.
And the last kind of few slides have just been going through from exhibitions that I've been involved in, so curated. And I guess for me that's really important that it is changing from viewer to user, and that you also become kind of almost, there's a performative element that actually to engage with these works you suddenly are almost kind of, it's performative, and therefore you become the performer for somebody else to watch you interacting with the work. And I really, it gives me a lot of different ways in which to engage with that kind of cultural conversation with people, which I personally really enjoy. From a design point of view, when you design a show that has static assets in it, you can have, you can place them and they stay there and they still are the same that they were 5 minutes ago. But when you're actually starting to design into a dynamic space, it's like all of these conversations that are going on. So it's like a community of works rather than individual works that are kind of building on each other as a kind of context. It's a complete performance. You can never tell what's going to happen at any one point because different things are going to be happening on different screens, even though you know each one of those works very well. So it's kind of like, it's like a live baby. You kind of put it in there, do the best, and it sort of starts to generate its own experience. And so therefore, as people coming, as an audience coming, it's not the same show for anyone. It's completely different. Not only do you bring yourself, which is what you always do with a static exhibition, but also you go into a dynamic space. So then it's different for you literally as, you know, rather than a static environment. So those are kind of some of the drivers that I really enjoy, which are a lot more kind of in the, that's not half as much fun as zombies, but, you know,
No, but I
someone's
mean,
got to do
when
the
you
gallery
create,
stuff.
like a lot of the thing with these digital works is the problem of how hard you make it for the user. Like, especially when you're designing games or even when you're doing an interactive work in a gallery, you know, everyone's concerned about how hard it's going to be for someone to do. But actually what you find is people only get real satisfaction out of overcoming that challenge, or that kind of, that moment, that aha moment where they've worked it out is such a lovely moment that I kind of find that that's part of the satisfaction with the work.
Yeah.
Is
You're
that,
completely right.
you know, that kind of thing. You can see it. Oh, right, got it.
Yeah.
And I love it when you get into these kind of situations where some people have figured it out and other people haven't.
And then they tell each other.
And there's all sorts of people in our community. So some people don't want to tell and just stand back and see whether people pick it up or not. Other people are running out the gallery, grabbing people, going, I know how to do this thing, come in and I'll show you.
Yeah.
So you have this kind of
Yeah.
really interesting dynamics that occur actually within the group, which I find fascinating as well, how people deal with that. So, why is it important that you go down these less charted waters?
Is this the signal
Why is
slide?
it that you go venturing down these spaces? They're not easy roads to take. You know, there are lots of unknown rocks in shallow waters. And also, in consideration that you do insist in toddling off down these places, what do you think's coming up in the next 5 years? Where do you think and I know, I started off with 10 and went,
No,
not
10,
a
10, 10.
chance in 10. But even in 5 to
okay.
10, in your case, Deb, maybe you can go for the whole 10. You know, bit of soothsaying. What do you think is maybe coming around the corner?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, I think it's impossible not to go down these uncharted waters. I think we can't, I don't know, I guess it goes back to my previous answer about inherently in who we are, as creative people, we can't not go down the corridor that everybody else isn't. I think that's just part of the natural curiosity and drive to do new and different things. In terms of what it's going to be like in 5 to 10 years' time, see, I wouldn't be surprised if we suddenly had like just floating screens and we can suddenly be pulling out everything. I don't think that's that far away at all. In fact, I know people who are prototyping it right now, and
I think we'll be self-projecting.
yeah, I just
We'll
think.
just be walking around projecting virtual
I mean,
profiles
I
of
can't even
ourselves.
thinking back 5 years ago and trying to imagine what
I know.
2012 would be like.
That's why I
It's
shortened
just
it down
so-
from 10 to 5, because it's almost too
Yeah.
big a leap. So do you think it's a hardware revolution? I mean, I actually did say in brackets, so it is on the slide as the disclaimer, we're not even talking about 3D printers, which I personally think are a massive
That's totally
implication.
exciting. Yeah.
So we'll leave that to one side, or
Yeah.
else we'll just get obsessed with that.
Yeah.
But do you think it is a hardware leap next that's coming?
I think
or
a lot
bit
of
both,
no,
or-
I think a lot of it's kind of software and hardware driven a lot of the time. It's like, what's interesting is the
It's going
kind
to
of
continue to be this real.
there'll be
fusion.
major hardware stuff,
Yeah.
you know, not like the Surface or anything, but like there'll be some major stuff that comes out that'll make a big difference. But to me, like I'm working with Hoodlum on a lot of their ARG projects where they do alternate reality games around TV shows, and I have this, I don't know if it's a fear or a desire that it'll be hard to tell between our fictional and our real lives over time. Like, this is a slide that shows the websites for the fake characters that Hoodlum actually built up. But these ones down here, the ones that fans made up. So fans became part of the story just through their own co-production. And Hoodlum were looking out for it and bringing them in. So it's kind of people being actors and themselves at the same time all the time. And so for me, it's like, what kind of software is going to facilitate that?
This
So
alternate reality.
has anyone seen the Michael Douglas movie, The Game? Yes. Right? Kind of a bit like that, but all the time. And so you don't, and you know how we think everyone cares about privacy?
No.
For me to design the way I do, I have to expect other people are going to deal with privacy, other people are going to deal with ethics, all of these other things. I'm just playing in the yummy space. And I think the yummy space is what puts pressure on those kinds of policies by showing showing organisations and policymakers what people want to do, what they're prepared to do.
Yeah.
But I think the whole idea of us becoming multiple personalities at the same time, having fictional, fake, real lives, is kind of a really interesting dilemma, not to mention what might be happening in medical and military areas as well. So,
and that's quite interesting. So there's that kind of very much that kind of personal identity and how that's going to kind of be projected and perceived and kind of interdimensional in the world. And then the other is, you know, how that information comes into us as well.
All the big data stuff, like, you know, we'll be shopping and we won't even know it. We'll just have budgets and, you know, there'll be AIs making decisions about, you know, what's being delivered to our homes. And
I can't wait for no receipts and no accounting to be done.
But what will we be doing for fun? I don't, you know, it's this thing of balancing the automated with the manual, like how much manual input we have in our lives as opposed to how much automated. And the automated is becoming much higher, like even Amazon, what books you choose are recommended. So I think we'll be wearing virtual costumes that only other people can see, you know. So I might be sitting here talking with you, but my virtual costume that maybe some of you can see because you're playing the same game as me, you'd be seeing me as that character, and I'd actually be communicating with you on a different level.
That's right. We were talking about yesterday, you know, like you would be eating calories, or if you're walking, that sort of that exercise that you're doing in the real world is actually feeding, you know, hospital points into the game that you're playing. So, you know, if you're doing physical exercise in the real world, you're adding, you know, something to a character in a specific game that you're playing in.
I mean, a lot of the really big companies are doing a lot of what I like to call desfi, because I'm into sci-fi, right? And I think science fiction is all about us practicing possible futures and seeing what we feel about it. And some of it's not that good, but some of it's good enough for us to think about that. And for me, design fictions or desfis are all about designing possible fictions or possible futures for us to play around with. So, for example, Corning and a bunch of big companies, they commission a lot of prototypes and a lot of videos of worlds that don't exist yet. So Corning have this video of a woman getting up in the morning, a day in the life of, where it shows all this AR technology happening. So I've done that for Nokia, I'm doing some stuff for KBR and a whole bunch of other big companies that are all sort of commissioning these works of. So they're trying to get ahead of the game, and they're also trying to show you what their profile would be in 10 years. But it's these things that everyone's getting engaged with. If we can't make it now, they're in a race of what we would make in the future if we could.
Yeah.
You know, so it's already the future is
kind of... There's been a really big shift of kind of taking the imagination out of science fiction, which is a cultural thing called literature, and actually taking that whole kind of imagination into the design, the creative industry space, and go, don't worry about what's pragmatic and practical. Launch further into the future. Just write the science fiction, the design fiction.
Just
keep the imagination going.
Yeah, and I got a bunch of students who do a DesFi course with me where all they're taught, even though they're interaction designers, is green screening. So they design a whole bunch of interactions around a future concept that's not even around anymore, and then they green screen that into their everyday lives. And it's amazing how difficult it is for them for months to get out of it doesn't matter if it's not possible. It's so hard for our brain to stop thinking about what's the limitations now and not think about this. So they have these wonderful portfolios now that sit in these community portfolios of these future DesFis, which is really quite incredible, but really mind-bending for them at first.
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard to think outside the box. But I guess that's the business that you're in, which is great.
Yeah, no boxes.
No boxes. Well, on that note, I hope we've taken you on a little bit of a journey, and we've got some time for questions and answers. As mentioned, I think probably the interesting part is if you've got anything that you'd like to pick up on or ask the panel, that would be great.
Sorry we haven't actually shown you any works, but if you want to see them, you just contact us.
Yeah.
Oh, those things been going on behind you.
Screens.
We can't actually see you because it's a glow here.
Hi. I kind of have an interest in the synergy of man and machine. Looking at the Google goggles thing going on behind us there, this idea of wearing an interface that's part of how you move and act day to day without having to do some sort of foreign gesture to interact with a device. Rather, it's attached to your body in some way. And you were talking about screens in the air and all that sort of thing, and I can imagine, putting a contact lens in and that screen will be projected on us, and you've got something implanted in your ear so you can hear, and your jaw so you can talk, and all that sort of stuff. Do you have any experience with or ideas about, that kind of synergy between man and machine, and where that might lead in this sort of space?
Are you asking me? Or
Yeah,
anyone?
Yeah.
Well, I do in particular because my brother wears a prosthetic, so he's only has one leg, and he's performed in the Olympics and got a gold medal one year in the Paralympics. So, and I've met a lot of other people who wear, and so they've always been cyborgs to me. So cyborg means man on a bicycle, and my brother is a cyclist, so he gets snapped in with a piece of titanium into a bike, and he becomes part of it. And he rides it. So, and that was always been a background to what I do, is that this sort of thing of digital interface as a prosthetic, as an extension of self, be it physical. At the moment, it's really only textual or visual, but it's not necessarily very physical. It's interesting because one of my jobs, 50% of my time at the moment is spent with a place called The Cube, where we're using a G-Speak gesture technology, and I get really frustrated with it because all I'm doing is my body is a giant cursor, and I don't want to be a cursor. I actually want to both suck and spray digital information at the same time. So it's but when you play with it, you start to think of those ideas of, well, how will the digital world be on all the time, and how will we be both projecting and drawing in data all the time, and how does the body actually become a node of data? So when you're walking around and you pass someone else who has a very similar profile to you in all walks of their life, what happens?
I think clothing is really a space as well where that's moving into. So there's a real there's been some great leaps with digital, literally digital technologies woven into fabric. So, that idea, if you met someone that had the perfect profile, you both kind of light up in the same colour.
Yeah.
Even looking at existing applications like Nike's Fitband.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's already kind of, at a really, really high level, going down that track of kind of machine and man becoming one.
Because that's monitoring
everything.
all sorts of all kind of everything that's going on in your body, isn't it, for you?
I'm sure the government's really interested in all these things. This idea of you walking around as a node of data.
Yeah.
It's both the dystopian and utopian views of these sorts of things as well. I mean, I like to keep it in the light area. But, of course, science fiction lets us think about the dark areas of these things. But I kind of like this idea of, the subliminal. There's no such thing as a subliminal anymore. Everything's out there. Everything's sort of, there to be sort of drawn into a system and be processed and then spat back out again. How do we physically evolve from that? How they used to have that, is it Sony or whatever, who used to have the giant eyes or the giant ears because of the way you use the machinery?
Oh, yes.
I'm thinking 50 years. This whole
Actually,
thing.
the way your body adapts to it, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's a really interesting question because it's kind of this thing like, are athletics true athletics if they take drugs to, do these things? Like when we become professionals at the moment, people who are much better at searching with Google in my area of my academic life, you do much better in your role. So already having a kind of a command or a presence in the virtual world already helps you professionally in terms of your life, but also in other ways as well. So I think there's already these very strange things kind of going on, and the sort of data that's out there. I mean, I was talking before about the fact that I have 7 Tumblrs, 3 blogs, 4 different Twitter accounts, 3 different YouTube channels. It's like, how much...
Stuff,
a lot of crap is still crap, but it's kind of this interesting thing about how much of the data and how much about ourselves is actually of interest or is going to actually stimulate any interesting experiences.
And I think that's one of the big challenges. Like, we're making big data sets, we're now making mega data sets, and it's like, well, it's just data. And converting data to information and then information to knowledge are big steps.
But you know what's going to happen? You're going to be walking down a street of Paris or something, and inside your mind you're going to say, what's that building? And up a display will come. Yeah. And it'll tell you what that building is, and it'll show you a story, and you'll dance with a holographic person that's just walked in front of you. I don't know, just making it up. But, I think that lots of data in terms of the prosthetic body.
Well, it's the portals that are going to start mattering.
Yeah.
There's the data there, so how do we actually feed that data to us
and how do you
in a
turn
way
it
that
on
we
and
can
off?
make it sense?
When do you want it, when do you don't want it?
And how do we stop information overload?
It's almost
that
already
kind of-
email overload.
Yeah. And maybe it'll just be mind controlled and you can just say, I want nothing.
You just
I'm
lay
really
down.
bad.
You don't even get up.
Close your eyes.
Just turn
Oh,
off.
sorry, that was a long answer.
Any other questions? No. Yep.
Basically, our imaginations are our own limits now with the technology and AR. Do you think our current system and our way of living can handle these advances, or do we have to start reorganising society to be more like an immune system or a central nervous system for the planet where we start to be self-organising rather than command and control, where we're under control of the government, the banks, companies, that sort of stuff? Do we have to create that transition to a new type of system to be able to make these technologies work properly?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we always have been. I think, if you'd asked that question in medieval era, talking about, if we're going to modernise and start kind of becoming, a democracy rather than a kingship, are we going to have to... I actually think that it's not a new thing that our society has gone through. It's kind of a never-ending story of society. So, and I think it's kind of interesting as well that there's that kind of big central idea of central data, but as sustainability conversation and theorists are starting to say that we can't even have national policy on what is a plan for sustainability, because they've kind of worked out it needs to be a micro solution rather than a macro solution. So there's some great projects out there that are busy going, well, we just have to deal this in 100-acre lots because it's that complex, because there is no one solution. So I think actually, digitally as well as physically, I think we're going into the kind of micro system.
We can't forget too that there'll be digital ghettos in the world. We're talking about our sort of Western society, very privileged society, and I love it when there's these projects like, you give an iPhone to starving people in Africa and, they'll be able to do all this stuff and their life will be changed. That's sometimes the case, but not always. So the infrastructure, policies, people's expectations and ways of life, lifestyles, of course, will change with all this stuff, but it's interesting on a global perspective what that means as well. We're doing a project on green building sustainability, and there really is only one small zone on the whole planet that you can actually build a sustainable building. Everywhere else, it's actually taking away from the planet. So how do you actually, if you can't even get regional policy, how are you supposed to create these global ones? But I guess these big companies like Google and big companies like Yahoo and mining companies and all these big companies are the ones who will make the infrastructural changes.
Yeah, and they'll almost be like the guardians of all of that and the controllers.
It's going to be like Logan's Run.
It's just another movie.
I think there's plenty of room for innovation. The big companies are they try and buy innovation. They're not really good at coming up with it. So I think there's plenty of space for small groups. I'm co-organising a global disaster resilience event for October to be at UQ, and we're currently investigating holograms. So we're negotiating with Nickelback, because they're going to be in London to have a hologram streamed here for our fundraiser via a 20 megabits a second uplink.
Holograms are definitely the way, but combined with haptics, so that when you touch a holographic image or you actually get feedback.
Yeah.
That's going to be interesting.
Well, we're looking at having our logo, which is a world and a puzzle, done in a 3D image, so that we can have live venues that are streamed our information and our panel discussions all around the world, and we can pick a puzzle piece on this.
And that's here?
No, we're talking to Muson, who are world leaders in holograms, to develop this. So hopefully in the next few months we can have something together. But
and then Google will buy you.
Yeah. Oh well, no, we're not going to sell out to the big guys.
No.
We're trying to create digital platforms for collaboration that will bring anyone from an entry-level knowledge up to an advanced-level knowledge, where they can join the conversation and create global coherence around the highest level information, basically, so that we don't have to rely on governments or business to
Yeah.
really
get things happening.
That's really important.
Accessing thing.
Because a lot of the tools are there for people to make those sort of experiments, to take that. A lot of the time, big data projects are about about contributing to everybody's conversation about these big issues, because there's a lot of data out there. How do we actually access and communicate and demonstrate what that means and how that can happen? So there's still a huge area of innovation in interaction design and AR design to, utilise this in a way that is different from how the governments or the military...
And not just how we communicate to the digitally savvy, but how we communicate to everybody.
Yeah.
There was a couple of other questions over here.
Hi, I'm almost embarrassed by the simplicity of my question, having listened to all this sort of stratospheric conversation, but I thought I'd ask it anyway. I was really intrigued by the Floodlines exhibition and thinking how we could use that technology not from looking backwards but looking forwards. So when the next flood arrives in Brisbane or anywhere else in this state, how close are we to really being able to take an app to the Refidex and saying, well, when the flood's going to arrive, and okay, it's not coming to tomorrow morning, so I can have my birthday tonight and it'll be all right as long as people are out by 5 o'clock. That sort of approach to give people real understanding of the impacts of flood and when it might affect them. Is that
That's going
Disaster
on, actually.
management.
Disaster planning is going on. I think actually, I'm not, you might have more of a handle on this, but I'm certainly aware that after the floods, and of course it's the natural reaction is the first thing that everybody goes is how can we make sure we can avoid not knowing about this the next time? Because, as human beings, we're really good at forgetting stuff. It was in our lifetime and we even forgot that you flood here in Brisbane. So I think there's a lot of conversations and it is around 3D mapping, it's around gathering the right data, and it's around bringing those things together and then doing all of the kind of algorithm maths around that to kind of give the what-if scenario.
Yeah.
And a lot of... the Cube is certainly a space where we're trying to work on this as a
lot
challenge.
of scenario building.
A lot of scenario
prep,
building and putting you in the what-if, putting the viewer or the audience or the user into the what-if position. So rather than here's one simulation, here's another one, and here's a third, and you go, it's none of those. Heck, we don't have a plan because it wasn't one of these pre-recorded concepts. It's about kind of having enough data, which requires an enormous server somewhere to keep it all and make sure that you can simulate fast.
Again, you can use a lot of the data that's out there. So we've been working on how to create a platform that you can... it's like a mashup platform. So if there's, like, for example, we did it with the tsunami and with the flood, the Japanese tsunami, is that basically you can put in some search items on there like Brisbane, flood, the day, the year, and it will just bring up a mashup of all the data, Twitters, YouTube, news, all there, what's happening in your community. You could even put a neighbourhood, and so it actually throws up all the information. But the thing is, I was in New Farm and we had a power went out, so, I didn't have my computer anymore, and so I had to go onto the street and met lots of lovely people. But the thing is how do you use these existing tools? You don't have to build your own. There's so much data and APIs and models out there where you can actually create single interfaces that bring you up all the latest data from multiple sources. But you have to do it in a way that brings you up. The hardest thing is to bring up the most correct response to that, because you can put in floods and get all sorts of pictures.
And something meaningful and relevant.
Well, it depends who's looking at it. So if you're someone that's trying to plan for a disaster, so how do we equip the SES? Where do we think we most likely need our resources?
Yeah.
That's one thing.
Yeah, you want to be able to map that data.
It's contextual.
Yeah. So, but I think, I think the data's out there, the imagination's out there, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if, so at the Cube, it's on our list of things that we want to challenge and work with. The interface is out there as well. So I think it's a matter of the willpower and, dare I say it, the money. Because, of course, it is just an easy software package that you just drop some freeze code into, to actually kind of push that stuff forward. So, and I would like to think that in Brisbane we might do it before the next flood.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm sure there's no... we've probably got a couple more minutes, so if there's a short question, that would be fine.
Sorry, can you ask that on with the mic?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What are the links for that mashup that you just talked about?
Oh, okay. So we've done a fair bit of prototyping where mashup's actually quite simple things to do. However, it's about making it searchable, layers, categories, all of those things. So building a system around that, which again is using pretty accessible tools, so databases, APIs. We do a lot just with Yahoo Pipes, actually. But really, the mashup at the moment is at a prototype phase where you can do a whole lot of this, where it's worked a bit with the floods, it's worked a bit with the Japanese tsunami and things like that. So, we've got it to a pretty stable environment, but it was just a pilot study, so of course we just ran out of money to do it.
It's a researcher.
So, but the thing is as soon as someone's interested and comes along, we'll keep doing it in our spare time. But it's a really interesting way of dealing with that problem, is just creating tools to actually access already existing tools, so tools for tools.
There was also a really interesting thing that happened this year in the Northern Hemisphere in America, where through the Google system of asking where people were searching about flu, they were actually able to, for the first time ever, track flu as it went across the flu, as it went across Northern America, and also start to predict where it was heading to next and what were the medical solutions to that, because people were immediately, as soon as someone was getting flu, they were going onto Google and then they were looking at what the results were. Then they got the doctors involved, who then started to upload onto the public domain what they had been prescribing and what was working well, and it created this kind of bow wave in front. So suddenly in America they were able to predict, and it was the first time they'd ever tracked something that's always been really difficult to track before. So that's just kind of using data mining. I shouldn't think it was the sexiest interface, but it got
It's about having
done.
reliable sources. That was our other problem with the mashup, is making sure that the sources are reliable and avoiding a lot of the panic in disaster management, because there's a lot of panic.
And also
data.
getting straight off the net and straight onto the satellite system, and actually, back down to your telephone. It's always back down to this. Whatever one of these is, that's kind of ultimately. Oh, this is an iPhone, but it's down to a smart device that's going to hit on the, that's going to hit on the satellite system, because the network will go down pretty fast. However, on that point, because we have been here for a little bit of time, I would just like to thank you all very much for coming. Thank you both for coming along as well, and you're more than happy to rugby tackle them afterwards and swap business cards with all of us. Definitely interested in that holographic project. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you again, Jess, Lubi and Deb, for such an amazing discussion. And if you would like to revisit it, there was a lot to take in, or share it with your friends, there will be an audio and a video webcast available for download on the State Library website in the next few days. So good night, and we hope to see you back at the library again soon.